Wonderful. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of the Policy Committee, 23rd of January. Very special night because it's our annual visit from Thames Valley Police coming down to us from Mount Olympus. So we'll have their presentation after we've got through some of the procedural matters at the start of the agenda. The meeting is broadcast on the internet, available for repeat viewing as well. So item 2, declarations of interest. I think I have a couple. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, item 8 for professional interest in health matters. I will have to recuse myself from item 8.
Understood. Thank you. And Councillor Ennis.
Yeah, item number 6, declare an interest that I work in the criminal justice system and I am also chair of Reading Youth Justice Board.
But you're not planning to recuse yourself? Don't feel it's necessary in this respect?
No, don't think so.
Fine. Thank you, Councillor Ennis. Any other declarations? Wonderful. Then we'll move to item 3, minutes of the last meeting. Anything on those? No. Can we agree them as a correct record then? Excellent. I will sign them off. On to item 4, petitions and questions. No petitions, but we do have public questions and councillor questions tonight, so we'll work our way through those. So we begin then with public question number 1, which is Ms. Collius, and she will be asking the lead councillor for Environmental Services and Community Safety. So if you bring yourself up to one of the microphones on the bench before you. Which looks like an intimidating game show style bench this evening, but and then in the middle of the microphone there's a sort of button. There are actually several buttons, but it's the biggest one. There we go. Perfect. Over to you to ask the question.
Thank you. In my capacity as chair of the Oxford Road Safer Neighbourhood Forum, and recognising that the Chief Constable, Area Commander and the Police and Crime Commissioner are here this evening, I'm registering my concern at the very apparent reduction in policing resources now available in our area. I am aware that my concerns are shared with every other Safer Neighbourhood Forum chair across Reading. You will be aware from your own regular attendance at and reports to the Oxford Road Safer Neighbourhood Forum that in reality neighbourhood policing is not functioning as originally intended. However, I still read on the Thames Valley Police webpage that every neighbourhood in Thames Valley area has a dedicated neighbourhood police team that work together with local communities and partners. The website goes on to say that neighbourhood policing teams are led by a senior police officer and include police officers, police community support officers, police staff, police support volunteers and special constabulary. The Oxford Road Safer Neighbourhood Forum sits under Abbey and Battle Local Neighbourhood Policing Team, police which is listed on their website as 2 inspectors, 2 sergeants, 7 police constables and 8 PCSOs. Currently, I understand that the Oxford Road area has no locally assigned police officer, as the person is currently reallocated elsewhere, and a total of 2.5 PCSOs for the entire Oxford Road area. I understand that whilst we do not have police officers and PCSOs in Reading all the time, they float in and out of the Oxford Road area to every other part of town on an as-need basis. I am asking specifically about my local neighbourhood policing team. Can I ask the lead member to clarify what her understanding is as to how many of these posts are vacant, or how many of the individual police officers have moved, reassigned or reallocated to other policing duties in Reading or elsewhere, and how many are actually available to fulfil duties that deliver an approach that focuses on visibility, engagement, problem solving and community resilience. Can the lead member also say how badly Reading will be impacted by reports that 160 plus resignations amongst new recruits to Thames Valley Police can she also provide some clarity as to where these police officers actually are, if they are aren't full-time on our streets yet? Can you clarify when you expect these to be?
Thank you kindly. If you could just turn the microphone off for me. Brilliant. Councillor Rowland.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank Ms. Collias for her question. When I moved to this country 10 years ago and wanted to make a difference for my community by reducing the crime and ASB around my new home, your Oxford Road Neighborhood Action Group, under your previous chairing, was the very first public meeting that I attended. Given your long record of public service, I wish to, along with my colleagues, thank you for your level of dedication over the years as an active community volunteer who dedicates many hours of your personal time to reducing the crime in ASB along Oxford Road. Yet, here, you and I sit today, 10 years later, even more frustrated with the same issues than when we first met. I'll be honest with you, Teresa. The council is aware that there are challenges in relation to neighborhood policing as residents want to see it. Police out in your neighborhood that know the local area and are seen to be out deterring crime by their very presence. You and I both have concerns raised to us daily by residents. I am sure that you are also aware that this issue has been raised with the Thames Valley Police by myself, my colleagues, and this council on many occasions as we lobby for better resourcing to tackle illegal behavior here in Reading and for a return to visible neighborhood policing. However, you and this council have been advised that there are challenges with resources at the current time. We have been given varying dates of when this will be resolved and varying promises of what numbers they will be able to dedicate to the Oxford Road area. The latest information that the council has been advised is that the situation will improve over the next 18 months. I truly wish I had the answers for you. One thing I will not do is to berate the local Reading police force that we do have, because we are fortunate here in Reading to have a dedicated team led by Superintendent Raffield that work day in and day out to ensure the town's safety with the very limited resources that they are given. But in hopes of giving you the most accurate answers, your question was forwarded on to the PCC and the Chief Constable last week. And I trust that our police colleagues here tonight will give you a more comprehensive answer to the very real concerns and queries that you have raised in their presentation this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rowland. Ms. Collias, you can ask a supplementary question only in as much as it seeks to clarify some element of Councillor Rowland's answer. Did you have a supplementary question? Go for it.
I thank Councillor Rowland for forwarding my response to my query to the Police and Crime Commissioner and the Chief Constable this evening to address it more fully. However, at the end of the evening, Councillor Rowland, if you do not see them fully addressing my questions, would you be willing to back me in requesting to have the Police and Crime Commissioner come to our area and answer questions from members of the public about very real issues? In the past, Anthony Stansfield.
Ms. Collier, so I'm going to stop you there
okay.
because the supplementary question has to be short and it has to seek to clarify. That's
Okay.
a very good question, but it doesn't seek to clarify Councillor Rowland's answer. So I'm going to rule it out of order, not for any personal reason, but to be consistent with the fact that I quite often rule out of order supplementary questions from this lot here. And I'm going to move forward to public question 2. Is that okay?
Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. In which case, public question 2 is Mr. Haskins. If you wanted to come up to one of the microphones for me.
Thank you. As chair of the North Reading Safer Neighbourhood Forum, I'm also aware that the Police and Crime Commissioner and the Chief Constable are appearing, as they do annually, at the council this evening. I'd like to take this opportunity to ask Councillor Rowland a number of related formal questions. These are questions that I have raised at numerous Safer Reading Forum meetings, the North Reading Safer Neighbourhood Forum meetings, and issues that I've also raised with the PCC when he's kindly agreed to have meetings with me. During my tenure as chairman, I spent a lot of time with each of the local neighbourhood inspectors. A few years ago, just before COVID, I spent time with the then inspector as I thought that we had less neighbourhood police resources than was required. Following a long analysis of the data at the police station, the inspector agreed and said that North Reading should have 2 police constables and 3 PCSOs based upon the level of crime, the size of the population, etc. Given that there was a shortage of PCs at that time, it was determined that North Reading would have 1 PC and 4 PCSOs. Since then, I think there's been an increase in police funding at a national level to increase the number of PCs. There has also been an increase in council tax in the form of the precept to protect neighbourhood policing and the PCSOs across the region. I realise that there are many difficult issues such as recruitment, staff turnover, training, COVID, etc. However, my question is very simple. Given the background, can you please tell me why my local police team currently only consists of 1 PC and 1 full-time PCSO and 1 part-time PCSO? And more importantly, can you please, with the PCC and Chief Constable here this evening, please give the North Reading Safer Neighbourhood Forum a commitment as to when North Reading will be at least back to the old size of the neighbourhood team, i.e. pre the announcement of an increase in police officers at government level and before the precept aimed at supporting the neighbourhood team. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haskins. Thank you very much. Councillor Rowland.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to thank Mr. Haskins for his question. And again, along with my colleagues, I'd like to publicly thank you for the incredible amount of hours as a volunteer that you have spent over the many years to press for resident safety north of the river. Mr. Haskins, as you know, police resourcing is allocated from national government. Reading has what we have been given. You are also aware that although we as councillors and officers lobby consistently for greater police resourcing, the council cannot just make that happen. Police numbers and allocations across the country are in the hands of the current government, and the PCC and Chief Constable are the allocators of the resourcing that they have been given. Noting their struggles with resourcing and having to constantly react to need across the wider TVP region, that information is beyond our ability to give you with any surety. And best we have been advised is that the situation will likely improve over the next 18 months. As with Ms. Collius's query, your question was passed on to the PCC and the Chief Constable, as they are the only ones that have the ability to answer the very specific concerns that you have raised this evening about what resourcing they will be able to place in your area and indeed across the whole of Reading. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rowland. Mr. Haskins, did you have a supplementary that seeks to clarify? Wonderful. Then we'll move to your next question, public question 3, again to the lead councillor for Environmental Services and Community Safety. Over to you.
Thank you. I'm aware that some of Reading's neighbourhood teams appear to being asked to attend routine events in other areas outside of Reading, and that's not the outskirts of Reading, that's outside of Reading. Given the size of the neighbourhood teams, this is very concerning. I've just been sorting out the dates for the North Reading Safer Neighbourhood Forum meetings for 2023. I've been told that the 1 PC that is allocated to North Reading might not be able to attend all of our meetings because he's also been allocated to the response team. Can I please ask that North Reading Neighbourhood Police Team is allocated to North Reading, i.e. as per the precept literature, to protect neighbourhood policing and the number of police and PCSOs? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Rowland.
Thank you, Chair. And again, Mr. Haskins, I'd like to thank you for your excellent question. It is a shame that when the Safer Neighborhood Forums were restructured in 2017 and 18 from the former neighborhood action groups, that action was undertaken at the behest of local police to work with them in providing a platform whereby they could communicate and engage with the public. The council eagerly agreed to support that Safer Neighborhood Forum structure with the goodwill of the police at that time. I find it most regrettable, therefore, that 5 years later we find the police struggling to attend those meetings, which are attended by dedicated community volunteers and concerned residents that have vital information that can help police solve local issues. Sadly, your area and your forum's attendance by the police is not unique across Reading. At the Safer Neighborhood Chairs meeting last Wednesday night that you attended, I noted your query was echoed by every Safer Neighborhood Forum chair there. all of whom wanted to know, where are our neighborhood police? The last Oxford Road Safer Neighborhood Forum had no police officers or PCSOs attend at all. And as we heard at that meeting, the Coley Safer Neighborhood Forum chair had written to the PCC on the 13th of November to query residents' concerns about neighborhood policing. An answer I understand that was only provided this weekend after a complaint was lodged by that chair to the Office of the Police Crime Commissioner. As with your previous question, this one was also passed on to the PCC and the Chief Constable to give a more comprehensive answer to the issues you have raised.
Thank you, Councillor Rowland. Supplementary question, Mr. Haskins, over to you.
Thank you, Councillor Rowland. I would just like to ensure that you understand that the attendance from our local neighbourhood team has been very good in the past, and it's 2023 that I'm really concerned about because of this allocation, particularly of our PC, to both neighbourhood policing and the response team.
Councillor Rowland.
Thank you for that clarification, and I do understand that, and I am aware of your concern, and I do hope that the PCC and the Chief Constable will address that this evening. Thank you.
Wonderful. Public question 4 then, again, Mr. Haskins, again to Lead Councillor for Environmental Services and Community Safety. Over to you.
Thank you, and this is a question really regarding operational day-to-day policing in our area. Can we please reintroduce the Police Have Your Say Days in North Reading, and can you please advise your support for local Speedwatch campaign work as undertaken by volunteers? The Have Your Say Days were used as an active tool for tackling ASB in our area. They were used at problem locations reported by residents and residents associations. This gave residents the opportunity to inform the neighbourhood police team of events that were occurring. Careful choice of time and location also allowed our local PC to use the Have Your Say Day as an active tool in tackling antisocial behaviour. North Reading has not had a Have Your Say Day for some time, which my understanding is due to lack of resources on the North Reading team. Can you please commit to working with the police to return Have Your Say Days to North Reading? I'm also aware of a worrying incident at one of the new volunteer Speedwatch campaigns that was run by a local community group, in which a car was reported to have mounted the curb and driven at a group of volunteers. This incident exactly mirrors a concern that was raised at the Safer Reading Forum by one of the chairs of the other Reading Safer Neighbourhood Forums. I am also slightly concerned that this is a shift from volunteers supporting the neighbourhood policing team to volunteers taking over a role that neighbourhood policing team used to administer. Can you please tell me if you think that a PCSO should be in attendance at Speedwatch events in North Reading on safety grounds? And if the answer is no, could you please assure me and the other neighbourhood forum chairs that the event organiser will not be liable in any way should such an incident occur? And can you please also tell me how effective you think the volunteer Speedwatch campaign will be in terms of reducing speeding, given the limited powers available to it? And how do you see that fitting in with any other council-led initiative to reduce speeding? Thank you.
Thank you kindly. Councillor Rowland.
Thank you, Chair. And again, thank you for your question, Mr. Haskins. The Council appreciates the value of resident engagement events such as Have Your Say Days and is supportive of any police resourcing that could be dedicated to ensure that there is regular engagement with residents in the town, be it Have Your Say Day events, safer neighborhood forums, or any other method that might be able to provide the community access to speak to the police. I am also familiar with the situation about the Speedwatch campaign that you have referred to. And I have to admit, I find it extremely perplexing that the PCC believes it is good practice to juxtapose well-intended community volunteers trying to reduce speeding in their own area against a random driver who could be uninsured, drunk, or angry behind the wheel of over a ton of speeding metal. Beyond potentially lethal incidents, community volunteers have also been hurled insults from drivers when participating in Speedwatch programs. I query if asking this of volunteers with or without a PCSO present is the best way to reduce speeding in our communities. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, Reading Borough Council has been, over years, at the forefront of lobbying for speed enforcement powers to be handed over to local councils so that they can get on with using those powers that the police fail to use in Reading and elsewhere. And I will ask this again of the PCC right now. Will you support this council and other councils in the right to take this under our control? We will provide far better results than reckless drivers receiving a series of warning letters. Finally, Mr. Haskins, again, the PCC and Chief Constable have been passed this query, and I eagerly await their explanations and answers to your specific concerns in their presentation this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rowland. Did you have a supplementary on that one? Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mr. Haskins. That takes us to the end of public questions and just inside time. Over to councillor questions. Councillor question 1 is Councillor White to the lead councillor for Corporate Services and Resources. Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. This question is on supporting local business. Green Party councillors believe having a strong local economy is key to tackling many of the challenges we face. Manchester City Council has moved its local procurement spend from 44% of its budget to 70%. What percentage of Reading Council's procurement spend is spent locally, and what plans does the council have in this area?
Councillor Terry.
Thank you, Chair. So, of course, I want the best for our local economy, because a strong economy can make the community that we live in stronger and more resilient and have a positive impact on people's experience of everyday life in Reading. I am aware of the work that councils such as Manchester and Preston have done to increase their spend with local suppliers, and have noted the efforts required and time taken to make the positive progress that they have in this area. Manchester City has been working with the Centre for Local Economic Studies since 2008 to do this, some 14 years or so. Positively, our own corporate plan confirms under our foundations that the best deal is not always the cheapest. It is the one that protects people, jobs, the environment and the budget. So we are also evolving our procurement practices to enhance the social value in all that we do. This includes, of course, taking proactive action towards maintaining and involving a strong local economy. The Council is undertaking a number of actions that will, amongst other things, enable us to embark upon, if not a similar journey, then one that is best for our community. These include implementing a new finance and procurement ERP system to enable the required access to relevant data, baselining our current supply base to identify spend patterns and goods and services that are available, if not locally, to identify supply voids and opportunities to bring local businesses, including social enterprises, into our supply chains, and or to create new businesses where there are no existing suppliers of those goods and services here, so where they are being bought from outside Reading. Being clear on what we mean as local and looking to initiate dialogue with other public sector bodies in Reading about their own spend patterns and the possibilities of working together. For example, Manchester City included the Greater Manchester area, much bigger than the city itself, making procurement spend more accessible to local small businesses and third sector organisations, while at the same time increasing community benefits and social value delivered by our suppliers. I note that the information found via this link that's in the paper circulated suggests that the amount spent with Manchester-based organisations in 2020-21 was 247 million, or 59.3% of the total spend with the top 300 suppliers. This is an increase from 51 to 51.5% in 2008-9, a relatively small increase in quite a long period of time. So I'm not sure where you got the 70% spend figure from. I strongly agree with the following from the Centre for Local Economic Studies, which considers progressive procurement of goods and services to be one of the 5 strands that can deliver community wealth building, with other strands including fair employment and just labour markets and socially productive use of land and assets, which is clearly in line with the Council's social value aspirations and achievement to date. I think the last time we looked, because I know you're going to ask me for this figure, but the council officers were reluctant to give it because they are doing some new and different work, was something like 51% was spent locally. So not very much out of line with what's happening elsewhere. Nonetheless, I'm happy to keep the committee updated on this progress.
Thank you, Councillor Terry. Councillor White, did you have a supplementary question?
Well, I had a lovely supplementary question, but then Councillor Terry snuck the answer to it in that last bit that wasn't written down. So I guess my supplementary question is, when are we going to have the new baseline of the percentage of spend with local businesses, or of procurement spend with local businesses?
Councillor Terry?
Thank you, Chair. We have a new Assistant Director of Procurement and Contracts who's only been with us a short while. We also have a new system, financial system going live, all things crossed, in April, and that will enable us to do better interrogation of the data. So the 51% I was a bit reluctant to put in, but it is the last figure we could find. But I think that we need to do much more work, and I'm told that this will happen in the next 12 months.
I suppose if we used a comparable geography to Greater Manchester here, we'd end up with at least the Thames Valley and probably the entirety of the South East, and it would be kind of meaningless for what we're trying to sort of talk about. So understandably, we'll have to have some discussions around how best to capture these things. Anyway, moving to Councillor question 2, again, Councillor White, this time to the lead Councillor for Adult Social Care, Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. This is on ambulance waiting times and adult social care. Devastatingly, the National Health Service is in crisis. Please can I get an update on ambulance waiting times at the Royal Berkshire Hospital and what the council is doing through adult social care to help alleviate this problem? Please can relevant council key performance indicators be included in the reply, targets actual performance and direction of travel for each indicator? Thank you.
Councillor Ennis.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you to Councillor White.
Just line your mic up with your mouth a bit more, John. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor White, for your question. The National Health Service is under enormous pressure this winter, and as predicted, it has been the worst in NHS history for demand on A&E services. The COVID pandemic has left a backlog of operations and other treatments, compounded with a spike in COVID this winter and a substantial increase in flu and other viruses, as well as an increase in complexity of health and care needs, which has led to overwhelmed accident and emergency and ambulatory services. Coupled with this has been the ongoing strike by nurses and ambulance staff. The council does not have access to ongoing performance data regarding ambulance waiting times at the Royal Berkshire Hospital, with NHS digital reporting at the West Berkshire level for the South Central Ambulance Service. However, feedback from the Berkshire West, Oxford and Buckinghamshire, the BOB, Integrated Care Board, has been that demand in the Royal Berkshire Hospital A&E department is 20% higher than in winter 2021, and that the target handover times between paramedics and the A&E department is below that of expected target levels. Reading Borough Council Adult Social Care are working very closely with our NHS colleagues to reduce hospital admissions and support discharges as much as possible. With the additional winter discharge funding that the government announced in November, the council has been able to implement a plan to put additional social care resources at the Royal Berks to support discharge coordination and have increased the capacity in the home care and care home market, commissioning an additional 3,200 hours of reablement hours and 5 additional discharge to assess care home beds that have improved the flow out of the hospital. Councillor White has requested information on key performance indicators, and adult social care are measured closely with their performance around both discharges and admission avoidance as part of the Better Care Fund joint arrangements with the Integrated Care Board on a quarterly basis. One of the measures that provide an indication for this area is a measure around the length of stay in the acute hospital bed. A longer stay could evidence a delay in discharge. The target measures the percentage of people still occupying a hospital bed at 14 days and 21 days after admission. The lower the percentage, the better. Based on the latest data we have, the target for 14-day is no more than 9.6% people still in hospital, and we are achieving 9.2%. The target for 21 days is no more than 5.5%, and we are achieving 4.5%. Another indicator linked to discharges is the percentage of people that are discharged to their normal place of residence, which is really important for us in Reading as we promote Home First. The target is that at least 92% of people are discharged to their normal place of residence, and we are currently achieving 93.4%. Reading Borough Council's Adult Social Care Department work in partnership with the wider Berkshire West Health and Social Care System to improve pathways and services for our local residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ennis. Councillor White, did you have a supplementary?
No, thank you, Chair. And thank you, Councillor Ennis.
Thank you very much. Excellent. Right, takes us to the end then of councillor questions. It takes us on to item 5, decision books, no referrals. On to item 6, the Thames Valley Police presentation. There we go, we got there. So if I invite the Superintendent, Chief Constable and the Police and Crime Commissioner up to the game show table. You'll need to find a microphone, there we go. And over to you guys, and I understand that our monitoring officer is running the slides tonight, which seems like a really good use of his time. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'll kick off with a brief introduction, if I may, and then I'll hand over to the Chief Constable and Superintendent Raffield, who will give the operational update, which no doubt will be much more interesting. A couple of bits I wanted to talk about, and it's really my focus for 2023. In terms of officer numbers, which I know you've obviously already had some discussion of in the questions and is clearly top of everybody's mind, I think it's worth pointing out we have more officers in Thames Valley than we've ever had before. It's a good position to be. There are challenges with that around getting those officers through training out onto the streets where we'll want to see them, and the Chief Constable will talk about that in his presentation. But we are approaching 4,900 officers in Thames Valley Police. We should be just over that number by the end of the financial year. We will have overachieved on our Home Office recruitment target, and the budget that is going to Police and Crime Panel this Friday will set to include that additional recruitment in the forces establishment. So we retain that going forward for the future. I'm really keen that we improve reporting to the police as one of the key parts of the strategy for 2023. 101 is an area of concern which I challenge Chief Constable on regularly. We need to significantly improve the speed of the time to answer on that. There's work ongoing at the moment, not just in ensuring we can maintain the level of staffing that we need within that team, but looking at some of the processes and also hopefully providing an online service for people to be able to get updates on their crime. At the moment, around 15 or 20% of calls into 101 are people wanting an update on what the latest is on their crime. If we can move that so you've got access to that data online 24/7, that will remove some of that demand and I think provide a better service for members of the public who want to get that information. And I think there are much more we can do in that move to embrace new technology, and this is not I think the councils have been in a similar position to this. We went through probably 10 years ago trying to push people out of the door and onto the phone, and then we got into the mode of pushing people off the phone and online, and lots of parts of the public sector went through that. I don't think generally we're not pushing people anymore, they're pulling. A comparison I would use is that actually if you were waiting for your Amazon delivery and it was late, you'd probably be rather affronted if Amazon told you that you've got to ring up and wait on the phone to talk to someone. You want to just get the answer now on your phone, and that's what people have come to expect. So the easier we can make it for people to report online, I think the better. And I think that particularly goes for those areas of community concern where people may not necessarily be a victim of crime, but it might be concerns about drug dealing, it might be suspicious behaviour from people, where actually if you're a victim, you will hang on the phone. You might be annoyed if you have to wait what you consider to be too long, but you will hang around. But if you've just seen something that looks out of place, then you might feel public spirited and make a phone call to report it to the police. But if that call takes you too long, your sense of public duty may well dry up pretty quickly, and you will go to bed feeling you've tried to do the right thing, but you couldn't get through. So I think it's really important we make that as easy as possible. Then look, we have to look at putting those numbers that I've talked about into community policing, that additional scope of the additional recruitment of officers plus others from across the force. I'm hoping that this year we can put into community policing teams to address some of that challenge we've had in the past over abstractions that will start to come to an end, but also really bolster the numbers of community police officers quite significantly. And we had to have some more announcements on that in the coming weeks. PCSOs are a really important part of that picture, and members may well be aware, and it's referenced in some of the public questions, that not only have we had neighbourhood officers seconded into response teams to make sure we can respond to the 999 calls, many PCSOs have taken the opportunity to become police officers. Now, that's great for them. They often make very good police officers, so it can be very good for our communities, but it's bad for the organisation because it's left a gap somewhere else that we're having to backfill. No, that's not a lack of desire to have PCSOs. We haven't been pushing PCSOs into becoming police constables, and we are currently recruiting for them. Those vacancies are there, and I hope we can recruit them as quickly as possible. But I think we do need to look in the coming year about whether we can bring forward the recruitment of some police officers, accepting that we probably won't recruit all of those PCSOs in the current financial year because the numbers are large and it is easier to recruit PCs than PCSOs. So I don't want to reduce the overall establishment of PCSOs over the next, say, 3 or 4 year period, but actually if we can bring more people to the front line as police officers, then I think that is a good place to be. And all of that should allow the force to become much more proactive in dealing with those issues of concern in the community, being able to engage more with the neighbourhood forums and with local authorities to build that partnership working, and particularly to get involved in local community activity to really get to know the communities they serve. I just wanted to pick up very quickly a couple of points that were raised towards the end there about volunteers and community speed watch. I'm sure we'll have more of that in the questions later. Personally, I don't see this as a shift of work away from the police to volunteers. It is about supplementing the work. There are volunteers who are really keen to do this work, and I wouldn't suggest that it's an inherently dangerous occupation for them and that we shouldn't have volunteers. There are lots of volunteer groups I can think of across Thames Valley who would probably be rather aghast if I told them they could only go out when they could be resourced to have a PCSO with them. Clearly, we wouldn't want to put volunteers in a dangerous situation, but the awful case that was cited is a rarity, and I would hope that the details from that incident are being properly looked at, because we had a couple of those incidents which have been pursued by the roads policing team as a result of aggressive behaviour by drivers. But I think it is a really important part of the mix. I think it can prove to be effective in encouraging the community to take action and having a wider reach than we would necessarily otherwise have. In terms of the speeding policy, which Councillor Page has for many years been pushing, I would reiterate what I've always said to Councillor Page and others. I have no objection if there are changes, and I don't think there's been any objection from the force. It is not in our gift to give you. But if that change were to come about, then I'm very, very content with that. Why would we not want another partner in that arena assisting the police in dealing with speeding? But I'll hand over to the Chief Constable to give his presentation and happily take questions towards the end.
Thank you, Matthew. Good evening, everybody. John Campbell, Chief of Thames Valley Police, also joined by Steve Raffield, who's the local police commander that I know many of you will know. Thanks again for the invite. I've got a presentation now talking about some of the stuff we've been doing across the force and some of the work that we've been doing. I guess it won't come as any surprise, because you'll have this as a council, won't you, that often people will focus on what you don't do rather than what you do, and I get that. And that's what the very nature of these meetings are about. hope to give you a sense of what we are doing across the force, which is replicated in Reading as much as any places. I'll hand over to Steve halfway through, a little bit from me at the end, and then obviously very happy to take any questions. Thanks. Next slide, please. Okay, so a little bit about the force as a whole, and I may cover off some of the points that have been made, absolutely all valid points, by the way, made by members of the public who asked questions earlier. So the force obviously covers the 3 counties of the Thames Valley, one of the larger forces in the country. I think we're about the 6th biggest, which is helpful on some occasions and provides challenges in others. We've got 11 local police areas, and I'm at the moment doing a number of visits to councils, and it won't come as any consolation to you that a number of the themes that are raised with me are exactly the same, that people want to see more of their police. And I do get that, and I support that, and I would agree with that. In fact, you know, I think we should be flattered as a police service that people want to see more of the police in their communities, because there's many people around the world in other jurisdictions that would not necessarily want to see as much of the police as we do here. So we acknowledge that, and we try and meet the expectations. I'll touch on that a little bit more in due course. We've got a population of around about 2.5 or 6 million people, and we do have 108 neighbourhoods. That will continue. Neighbourhood policing is an important part of the force strategy. I'll talk a little bit more about that in due course. And we do welcome 600 million visitors across. So that's the force, and that's the area that we police. Thanks. Next slide. Just a little bit about the management team, because there are some changes. I'm retiring from policing at the end of March. My successor is Jason Hogg. He's the Deputy Chief Constable and has been the Deputy within Thames Valley for the last 4 years. We also welcome some other people to the team. Dennis Murray there, second on the left there on the bottom. Dennis has joined us from Northants Police, and he's the Assistant Chief Constable for Crime and Criminal Justice. And Kath Akehurst is currently our Joint Operations Unit, although she'll be moving to Hertfordshire shortly. And Tim DeMeyer in the middle there has just been successful in his bid to become Chief Constable of Surrey. So TVP will be recruiting some new members of the team. We do have some members of staff, particularly police staff, Linda Waters on the right, Christine Cove on the left, who have been with us for some time as part of the management team. Thank you. Next slide. A little bit about the numbers, and Matthew has touched on the very welcome increase in police numbers, but I guess the one equation I'd ask you to reflect upon is 4,860 odd police officers for 2.6 million people. Now, that doesn't mean that 2.6 million people are law breaking, far from it, but they all deserve the protection of their police force. The challenge can be on occasion significant. We have had in effect a welcome increase over the last 3 years of what's been known as police uplift. You may have heard that term, and we are benefiting for in excess of 609 officers. I guess the observation I'd make is that during austerity, we did lose around about 750 officers and a number of police staff as well. So we're getting back to where we want to be, and it's certainly a really welcome increase in officers and staff. I would always be a very greedy Chief Constable and ask for many, many more than that, but we have to bear that in mind in terms of all the other public sector spending as well. We're joined by, in the policing mission, by 3,300 police staff, and those aren't people doing back office functions like HR and finance, as important as that is. These are people that are involved in call handling, maybe police staff investigators, crime scene investigators, etc. Matthew's mentioned about the situation we are with our police community support officers. We're around about 130 down on where we want to be for police community support officers. And the reason for that, as Matthew's alluded to, is one, there has been an abstraction to regular policing for those that want to join the police. And I have to say the police community support officers, when they do become regular officers, are fabulous. And if I could have every single officer join, having been a PCSO in Thames Valley Police, that'd be a wonderful basis to start their police careers, because the relationship they develop with the public and their ability to communicate and get to know the communities is first class. So we've got an issue of people wanting to join the police, which is good generally, and we do try and keep our PCSOs in the locations where they were when they become police officers in the locations where PCSOs. And at the same time, there's a bit of a recruitment issue at the moment across a number of areas of our public sector. I don't know if you're finding that within the council, but certainly we've got the spaces and we've got the finance, and it's a combination of both the abstractions and the recruitment as well. But the commitment to PCSOs is there, and we want to make sure we've got as many as we can afford and are paid for, because they provide that consistent and regular particularly regular interaction with their communities as well. Around about 229 special constables. These are our volunteer police officers who are a little bit like superheroes, really. They have a normal day job throughout the week, and then at the weekend or at other events, they put on a police uniform for free and then police their communities. We definitely want to see an increase in that as well. One of the challenges that we've had with a big increase, really welcome increase in police officer numbers, regulars, that training capacity has been put under pressure. But we will, as we move into April and beyond, have an increase in our recruitment around special constables as well. And then we do have a group of wonderful volunteers that often have worked in different industries that come and help policing in their communities, working at police stations and administration units, and also not too far away at the training centre at Sulmstead, which is not too far away from here. They often play the role of members of the public for our trainee officers and can be arrested maybe 16, 17 times a day in all kinds of weather. So good for them and much appreciated part of the team, and then our cadets and our mini police as well. Okay, next slide, please. One of the benefits of our additional officers is that we've been able to bulk recruit. It's put some pressure on lots of our teams to make that happen, not least our training teams. So this year alone, we've had 44 courses at our police training centre of new recruits. At the moment, what we've been able to do is take advantage of those numbers and really focus on our recruitment of Black, Asian, minority ethnic officers, and we've had some considerable success in that. It's not as much as I would like by a long stretch of the imagination. We have some way to go from a police point of view, but this year alone, 15% of our recruits have been from a Black, Asian, minority ethnic background. We've got a dedicated team of officers from a BAME background who are able to engage on a recruitment basis and shared some of those lived experiences of what it's like to be from a diverse background in policing, and we've seen some success. Also at the moment, 42% of my recruits into policing are female in terms of the recruits going into our training centre as well. As I say, we have more to do, but some welcome progress. Thanks. Next slide, please. So this is taken over a 6-month period or so, but you can just about double it up, and we're producing some other figures. We put a number of this information out in the autumn of this year just to share what we've been doing over the last 6 months or so in the force. It's fair to say that I don't think a single news agency picked it up, which probably doesn't come as a surprise, does it? But there we go. We'll keep trying. So around about 500,000 contacts from the public. Of those, about 90,000 attended incidents from officers and staff across the Thames Valley. About 15,000 arrests. Of those, 5,000 were for domestic abuse. Significant amounts of domestic abuse being reported to us now compared to where we were. We never have a reduction target for domestic abuse because we still think it's terribly underreported. You know, it's a hidden crime. Hopefully, and we do get surprisingly, when I say surprisingly strong, that's probably unfair, satisfaction rates for those who are being victims of domestic abuse when they engage with us are really high, even if we don't necessarily do what they want. And that may sound a bit odd, but sometimes we have to encourage people to enter the criminal justice system because that's our role. And sometimes domestic abuse can be a very complex area for people to live through, let alone the fear and intimidation that can come with it. I mean, from my point of view as a police officer, if we had something like an armed robbery, back in the day, certainly when I was a younger officer, cash in transits of like security corps vans and banks, we hardly ever get those anymore. Can't remember the last time actually within Thames Valley. But that's a fairly simple crime to investigate in truth, because you've got professional witnesses who are the guards, you've got intelligence and forensics, etc. One domestic abuse investigation with all the complexities that victims have, maybe living with perpetrators and issues often with families and children and all that stuff, makes it very complex. And we need to help and guide the victims through that as much as we can. But we have around about 100 incidents of domestic abuse reported to us a day. Knife crime arrests, a priority for the force. Reading has seen its own unfortunate fair share of knife attacks and associated murders and GBHs, grievous bodily harm as well. One is far too many. In general terms, as it happens across the Thames Valley, compared with other forces in terms of serious violence, we're amongst the safest of places to live in the country, but that is no consolation if you're a victim. Drug dealing and drug possession crimes recorded. You'll see a number of those. Generally, when we are recording drug possessions, it's because we've arrested the individual with some stuff also about drug dealing on an organised crime basis, you'll see that in a 6 months or so period, serious and organised crime groups, we've arrested 234 and we've confiscated 27 firearms. The bottom number is 250 odd arrests of people suspected of involvement in exploiting children and their offending. So there's two things. One is peer-to-peer exchange of indecent images, and that's where people are sharing indecent images, and there's others that are actually involved in trying to solicit, engage and exploit children for sexual purposes. Now, these are teams that aren't based in Reading. They will operate within Reading, but they are centralised teams, a part of our crime command, and you'll appreciate it's a very important part of the force's role. And the officers that do this, they spend their lives on the side of protecting children, but they also have to assess and view all the images that they put towards the court, which you can imagine are pretty challenging. We need to make sure we support them and wrap around their welfare as well. As you can imagine, that it's pretty difficult for them. Thank you. Next slide, please. We obviously have coalesced our activity in around violence and against women and girls into an overall strategy. I think we talked last year about this has always been a priority for the force, but we have reviewed and with additional resources as well, some of the areas of work. So rape outcomes up 8%, but still modest, still lower than we would want, but they're up on where we were last year. Outcomes for sexual offences up around 105%. And that's hundreds of offences, by the way. I know we give percentages, but there are hundreds of offences that we have improved upon, increased the amount of charges. And stalking and harassment. And if anybody knows a victim of stalking and harassment, the impact it can have on people's lives, and often a precursor to more serious offending, is significant. And I'm very pleased to say we've seen a welcome increase in support for victims. Domestic abuse I've talked about. That requires us to get to the scene quickly for our response teams, take positive action and arrest. And we've seen the formal action and you might argue some form of justice for victims of domestic abuse go up by 44%. And overall detections for the force, it's called outcomes. It's a newish term from the Home Office, but detections kind of, I think, covers it off in terms of plain speaking, are up about 21% compared with last year. Thanks. Next slide, please. Road collisions. We don't often talk about road collisions in such meetings as these, but 4,000 road collisions we attend in 6 months. That's around 8,000 a year. We have around about 80 fatal road traffic accidents a year. We had a terrible one on the M40 over the weekend. 2 people lost their lives in Buckinghamshire. Obviously, officers will respond to that and are dealing with that. Missing people. 3,300. So these are reports of people who have gone missing. Half of those are children, often in looked after care. And we have a responsibility and duty to find those people. Some of those people don't want to be found in truth. They just don't want to be with the people that they're with. 99.9% we return them to their loved ones or some safeguarding activity. Around about events policed, 319 in the last 6 months, one of which would have been Reading Festival, as fabulous as that is. The one observation I'd make, and quite rightly made, and a frustration from and it was Mr. Haskins, I think, it was talking about the challenge of officers moving outside of the Reading area. When we police Reading Festival, a number of officers have to come from across the force area to police Reading Festival. It's an unfortunate reality of policing. 810 odd people have been arrested by us, and I'll come on to that, arrested by us for whilst they're suffering mental health distress. That doesn't touch how many incidents we deal with where mental health is a factor. Far too many than we would all collectively want, I'd suggest. But from a policing point of view, we have a power of arrest if someone is a risk to themselves or risk to a member of the public. It really is a last resort for us. And we then have to engage with mental health services. It's fair to say my mental health colleagues would say that there's not enough capacity. And sometimes we end up having to step in. Around about 800 deaths in the community that my officers attend and engage with the family members, help them with the coronial process. And then for every one of those 800 deaths, there's an officer that is doing one of the from it's a distant memory for me now. It's been some years since I delivered death messages, but it's one of the more difficult things to do as a police officer when you're walking along, knocking a door and telling them their loved ones have lost their lives. And then it's now actually 1,200 assaults being committed against our officers last year. That's the calendar year, so 1,200 assaults against officers. And of course, it's not the whole lot, because out of that 4,800, some of those won't be doing the frontline uniform work, where the vast majority of assaults take place. So unfortunately, a number of those officers will have been assaulted more than once. And we acknowledge in policing, you know, with the police, we acknowledge that there's violence presented towards us, and on behalf of the public, we will intervene. But I don't think collectively we should ever allow it without outrage, quite simply, as there should be the case for any emergency service worker. Thanks. Next slide, please. A number of things really that, again, perhaps more of the general stuff around policing. It won't come as any surprise, and there's far too many reports in the media than we would ever want in around, you know, some of police officers around the country that have behaved in outrageous ways, both criminally and professionally. We do a lot of work within Thames Valley. We survey our staff on an annual basis in and around the issues of what it feels to work as a member of staff within policing. A female member of staff in particular. 52% of my overall workforce are women within Thames Valley. We did recently get White Ribbon accredited. This is an organisation internationally recognised that accredit organisations that are showing a commitment through words, but more importantly deeds, around stamping out misogyny, sexual harassment and discrimination. Race equality matters. We're a trailblazer status. I think one of the first forces in the country to receive that similar kind of theme, which is showing and being able to evidence what we are doing as an organisation to ensure that race equality is at the forefront of what we do. That's both as an organisation, but also how we interact with the public. And we did get an award and recognition for menopause friendly accreditation, and that's about recognising that we have, obviously, as I say, almost half my workforce are female, and I think the issue of menopause is hidden from, I think a number of my female colleagues would admit that some of the issues and symptoms, if that's the right word, or impact of menopause can have on women, or some women. These symptoms and effects are quite extreme. Well, we've done a lot of work around that so that we can give our staff the best support. And also some areas that, particularly within the council, if you think about taxi licensing and the like, DBS, we have for some time turned a corner on DBS. For a while, disclosure barring system, when I first joined Thames Valley, there was a difficulty with that, and the delay in getting people through their DBS checks has an impact on their employment status. And finally, firearms licensing, in terms of the turnaround on our review, we are amongst the better ones at the moment. Thanks. Next slide, please. Operation London Bridge. I touched on this because this is an operation that we will have drawn officers from Reading across. We had an operation for 10 days for the London Bridge operation, which we had collectively all been planning for, but never really welcomed and wanted it to happen. But we knew it was a natural reality. And on the day itself, we had 1,500 officers from Thames Valley and 500 officers from around the country supporting us on that policing operation as we were part of the interment of Her Majesty at Windsor. Okay, next slide, please. Thanks. I'll hand over to Steve now for some more local observations.
Thank you, sir, and thank you everyone for the opportunity to talk to you. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Community Safety Partnership. So I'm the chair of that locally, with Councillor Rowland is sitting alongside me. We've spent quite a bit of time this year thinking about our priorities over the next 3 years, and we're trying to get to a point where we're kind of reinvigorating the Community Safety Partnership. It's fair to say that it's probably, through no criticism, lost its way a little bit as a result of a number of factors. But we've got to a point where we've gone out to public consultation. We've got our priorities for the next 3 years, and these are some of the priorities, kind of summarised, if you like, that we'll be focusing on, including exploitation, the serious violence, which I know the Chief Constable's already alluded to, encapsulates knife crime. The elements of domestic abuse, which we're putting a significant focus on, and violence against women and girls, which we've already alluded to. Some of these groups already exist as delivery groups, and some of them will be forming. There are a couple that I just want to focus in on, really, and the first one of those is we've called tentatively community cohesion, hand in hand with public engagement. We've touched on this through some of the questions already, but I think collectively we'd probably agree that we've got some work to do in this space in helping the public understand what they're asking, what they're saying is a problem, what we're doing about it, and how we communicate that back to the public. We're not always, in my opinion, particularly good at that locally, and that's something we all agree we want to get better at. So there's an element of putting some real structure around what does our community engagement look like. How do we want that set out? Some of it's already been touched on with kind of have your say events, but for me this is a broad area, and we need a good community engagement plan. The serious violence steering group is already set up. Again, this is looking at complying with a serious violence duty, but we're working very closely with the violence reduction unit and looking at some of the data which is helping us understand where we need to put our resources. Who are the people we need to spend the most time working with, and where are the areas we need to police so we can have a real impact on violence reduction. If I could have the next slide, please. So just a snapshot of results, really. I'm really pleased with the progress made to date around exploitation of children and serious youth violence. We're looking at some of the data provided by the violence reduction unit to really understand and drill down and understand which individuals especially we need to focus on. Project Vigilant is being used extensively in Reading. It's a more proactive approach to tackling violence against women and girls. We had 2 stranger sexual attacks in Reading leading up to Christmas. Our investigation teams dealt with those and charged the people who were previously unidentified. And what that did was we were doing a lot of work in this space already, but it kind of accelerated the kind of need to bring the partners together and do more work in this space, something which I'm really keen on doing. Operation Rusk is our longer term approach to serious violence, mostly around parts of Tilehurst. Over recent times, we've had some incidents of serious violence, and we've been really keen not to fall into the trap of just moving resources around to deal with particular problems all the time, but to actually take a longer term approach and work with partners to actually try and make elements of that community better for the people that live there. So had some excellent results around dealing with drugs lines, something which probably goes unnoticed a lot of the time. The arrest of 130 people linked to drug lines in Reading, and in one case, £70,000 worth of drugs street value taken off the streets. 28 drug lines identified, and when I say disruptions, we talk about a range of things from people being arrested for drugs offences, but from a range of other offences as well, just to try and disrupt their activity. And I mentioned Op Roof. Sorry for all the police based names on these operations, but often burglary and theft offences do go slightly unnoticed these days. We had a significant increase in burglary and theft offences of bikes and burglary to houses and kind of commercial premises. And we dealt with a group of 5 people for a series of offences, and they've all been charged, which has had a significant impact for us. And then I'll just mention the hotspot policing app, something which isn't always visible to people. That sets out the 630 patrols in September and 233 hours of patrols in violence hotspots across the LPA. And that is, again, working with the violence reduction unit to identify those areas where the data tells us we can have the most impact. Next slide, please. I'm not going to touch on all of these. I'll pick out a couple that I particularly want to highlight. Knife crime, something which I worry about a lot, and I still think we've got more work to do in this space, but the early indications, an 8% reduction in knife-enabled crime is something which I think we should celebrate. Perhaps something more concerning is a 30% increase in personal robbery, and we were concerned about this before Christmas. We had a particular group of people who were causing us some issues, which contributed to a lot of that. We know who they are. We're working with them, and we've got some investigation around that. So I'm hopeful that certainly won't increase more, and we've got an idea of who's doing it. And then some of these we've touched on already. The ones that I think are particularly significant in terms of outcomes are the sexual violence outcomes. And this is the data that's specific to Reading. Increases in rape charges, increases in other sexual offence charges and other outcomes, and stalking cases. Again, mirroring something that the Chief Constable was talking about earlier around our commitment to violence against women and girls and public spaces safety generally. Thank you.
Sorry, forgive me. I will touch just on some of our speed enforcement. It's something that I get questioned about. Can we do more across the force area? On average, in a year, we issue 200,000 speeding tickets across the force area, which when I say it, sometimes people say, well, that sounds a lot, or too much or too many. It's one of those things that quite often people get concerned about, but also when they're subjects of it, perhaps have less of a positive view about it. We had Operation Holly, which was our drink drive initiative before Christmas, with 451 arrests for drink and drug driving, which is, I think if we think drink driving has gone away, I think we'd all be collectively mistaken, but a number of those were for drug impaired driving as well. 283 of those, 168 of those were drugs, which is something that we weren't encountering before. Obviously the testing's improved, so that helps. And 101 of those arrests were for people under 25 as well. So I share this final slide. Just this is our inspectorate, our Ofsted are called Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services. They do what are called PEEL reports, police effectiveness, efficiency and legitimacy report, and they issued their report last year to us. There were things that they definitely said we were doing well, others they said we could do better, and we wouldn't disagree. These are some of the narrative, and I guess when quite rightly people are asking questions about an organisation like the police in terms of its legitimacy and confidence, around some of the things that have been you've seen from other forces, but I've had to sack individuals in my force that should have no place in policing. But it said the force has an ethical and inclusive culture, and people are proud to work for Thames Valley Police, which was very encouraging, given sometimes what policing can throw at staff. That TVP are considered good at treating people fairly and with respect. The force works with diverse communities to understand what matters to them. The workforce understands how to use stop and search powers fairly. And a very important word for me is respectfully, because that can be a significant imposition on people's liberty. And dealing with people fairly and respectfully are important words for me to hear. And also when we use force, and we do have to use force against individuals, then we understand how to use force fairly and properly. Now, that doesn't mean we're at all complacent within Thames Valley Police. The number of strands of work to make sure that we can reassure people like me as Chief Constable what the organisation is and what the cultures are, but also reassure you and the community as well. But I just thought I'd finish with that as a reflection from our inspectorate from last year. Thank you, Chair.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for the presentation. Now, I usually allow about half an hour for questions and I alternate between one side and the other. You guys coming back to your seats or up to you? So we'll proceed like that, but I just wanted to thank you firstly for coming tonight. Also take the opportunity quickly to thank Superintendent Raffield for his work as commander here. I always like to do that for the commanders I like, and we've had 4 in my time as leader, so it's been nice to have a bit of stability with Steve here, and I think that's made a difference to some of the knotty issues that we have in Reading. But just to take, I think, a question initially, because we didn't speak much about it during the presentation then, which is around that neighbourhood policing theme that came out earlier this evening. And it's clear, and we would all find this in our wards across the town, that sort of public confidence, resident confidence in neighbourhood policing is at a very low ebb. And so even with kind of new officers coming and perhaps the replenishment of some of those neighbourhood policing teams, which is only as good as them being able to carry on with that job. No good, of course, if they can simply be abstracted to other responsibilities and it's simply a repository on paper. There's a big job of work for TVP to do about restoring that confidence. So I wondered, what will that look like and what is the commitment to neighbourhood policing in the future, if I might, Chief?
Thanks, Chair. If I describe where we're at the moment, and I share the concerns around neighbourhood policing across TVP, if I show if I share why we are there at the moment, and it is a moment in time, but it feels like it's going on a long time. So we've got this welcome uplift of 600 officers. So that's over 3 years, biggest increase we've had for some time, and they are in a training program. Now, the reality of where they're trained is that when they are deployed following training, they go on to response teams. Yeah, because that's the bulk, and you will have response teams at Reading who are doing the 24/7 patrol. The new method of training those officers, nationally agreed, has a certain amount of abstractions, and they're taken away. So I'm left with a slightly knotty problem, and Steve has it on a local basis, of maintaining the response teams. Now, these are the people that are responding to incidents with blue lights, the 999 calls, the risk, the threat, the higher harm jobs. I have to maintain those services, and I don't think many people would disagree that 999 protecting and those emergency resources, a bit like the ambulances, if I've got a choice, well, that's one thing I can't really give up as a function for policing. Now, the consequences of that at the moment is that we are using our neighbourhood officers who know the patch best, who are local officers, to backfill onto some of those response teams. And I agree, it's not ideal at all. I wish we didn't have to do it. It is a moment in time. The point of how long that will take depends on the local area. But the intention, and this is important, is that all those neighbourhood officers will be returning to neighbourhood teams. Okay, there's no reduction in the numbers of officers that we've got or intend to have on those neighbourhood teams. At the moment, I would agree with you, there's a number that are abstracted. The intention has always been in around neighbourhood teams is that on a general working basis, we try and leave the neighbourhood teams alone as much as absolutely possible. But this isn't necessarily, again, no consolation that it's a Reading issue. There are other areas across the force who legitimately say exactly the same thing, and I understand that. So that's the one aspect of things. So we've got a documented training program. We've got it planned certainly for the next 8 or 9 months. It will peak and trough depending on abstractions. And it will vary. Steve may be able to give a more of a local insight of how that feels. The other thing as well around the neighbourhood teams, I come back to the PCSO issue. So again, we've got the money, we can't get the recruits in for it at the moment. So PCSOs are a very familiar and stable way of delivering neighbourhood policing, as you know, and they're the people that quite often are coming to neighbourhood action groups, listening to the concerns of the public. So you've got a bit of a wicked combination at the moment within the force. What I would say, and it will be for Jason to take on, but I know he would say if he was sitting here, is that the force is absolutely committed to neighbourhood policing. We've got this knotty practical issue that we're trying to get through, but we are looking to certainly reboot that as soon as we possibly can. I know the Commissioner, quite rightly, is driving this very hard. So it's no good to me saying, bear with us, because that's, people feel the lack of the police in their communities. But those are the issues that we're dealing with at the moment. But the commitment is there, and we will return to much better days and much better resourcing. But I'll say that from my point of view. Steve, you got anything that you want to?
I think really just for local context, I mean, we talk about local policing a lot. We talk about, what we want to deliver, and part of that is, how do we want to engage with communities? And I think it's a full range of things. We've talked about have your say meetings, but we've got to kind of look at some of the digital opportunities as well. I think there are so many different ways of engaging with communities. Neighbourhood policing is undoubtedly the way we want to do that. I think what we do have the ability to do, and we've seen this in several instances, is we can surge our neighbourhood resources into particular areas where we've got a specific problem. That's proved quite useful around places like the Oxford Road on occasions, and into Tilehurst and Whitley. So although neighbourhood resources can sometimes feel like they're thinly spread, we do have that ability to tackle neighbourhood problems that are specific to particular areas. As I say, when we get back to a point where we can do neighbourhood policing proper again with the resources that we had before, I think that will be a better position to be in.
If I can just add to that, Chairman. So I think, I wouldn't disagree with anything that's been said. I think the point there about the returning to where resources were before, I'm clear from the budget that I'm setting for the force for this coming year. And again, those recruits they take some time to come through. I can't say 1st of April everybody's going to be there and in place, but actually I want the force, I want Jason as the new Chief Constable to be able to do that policing with more than the resources we had before. It's about putting people into neighbourhood policing, because I think that is where the strength, and you're quite right to refer to confidence. in that, because I think one of the challenges, and you saw some of the stats about what the force does do and does do really well. I'm really proud of what the force does, for example, around domestic abuse. And rape, they're really important things. Domestic abuse particularly is one of those things, you know, it goes on behind closed doors. People don't talk about it enough. We know that it's still underreported. There is a huge challenge, and there are people who will be suffering in Reading tonight who feeling trapped because of their situation. But frankly, however good the force is at dealing with that, won't inspire community confidence, because it's not a crime that we see. And what we need to do is create the capacity for the force to be able to do both, to be able to focus on the neighbourhood crime, the more visible, you know, the vehicle crime that we've seen challenges with, the personal robbery that's been talked about. We need to be able to do that as well as those other areas that are a bit more hidden, and because that is the most important thing, I think, in terms of confidence. There's lots of talk about challenges to policing confidence. They're all very important, but the one that I think hits most people in their day-to-day lives is actually the effectiveness of what they see around them.
Thank you. Quick comment, not another question. I mean, I've often returned to the fact that TVP has a bit of a communications gap in the way that it talks to residents, and I often find that there's more work that your comms teams could do to really get much more polished about articulating what it is that TVP is doing and why. And that's an important part of the sort of democratic process as well. I'm sure you'd agree, Mr. Barber, that we are able to understand the choices that are made and how the public might be able to engage with them on an ongoing basis. But I will go to Councillor Rowland, and then I'll look for someone on the other side.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank Police Commissioner Barber, Chief Constable John Campbell, and Superintendent Raphael for coming tonight to speak to us. I'd also additionally like to take this opportunity to wish Mr. Campbell a happy retirement and thank him for his years of service. We look forward to working with the new Chief Constable, Jason Hogg, when he takes position at the end of March. I'm going to, because I imagine others will go back and probably address neighborhood policing again, but I'm going to ask you on a slightly different subject. This late autumn, this council received a workforce review notification that outlined the fact that the Thames Valley Police are looking to take the 11 local policing authorities that they have down to 5 policing authorities. That would see Reading become part of a West Berks LPA, and will see us share a larger police force with both Wokingham and Newbury areas, where the crimes and the sort of crimes that happen there are vastly different from what happens here. Fighting for police to attend to concerns in Reading, which currently has the second highest serious violence crime rate in the Thames Valley, and a town that records the highest levels of serious violence in Berkshire, would be concerning to us in such a new allocation. I would like, as best you all could, to explain why you're going to that structure, other than what I can perceive as another cost-cutting measure, and to explain how becoming a larger and a wider area, including Newbury, Wokingham, and Reading, how Reading is going to be sure of getting that policing attention that we need to a very important area. The other thing is that Councillor Brock and I both wrote to both the Chief Constable and also to the NCC, that we were very concerned about retaining a town center presence insofar as a commander system like we have when the Reading TVP moves out of its headquarters. So, for example, at risk of that commanding center like Superintendent Rapfield, and how that would actually work if we've got to deal with a much larger policing force, and how are we going to get the proper attention paid to us? You've given us less money to run our community safety partnership with, but you have given us an excellent superintendent who set out a lot the work that we have been working on to set out our community safety partnership strategies. And we're obviously concerned that we're going to be able to drive those forward if we don't have that special attention paid here to Reading. We are here to fight for Reading, and I would like assurances from you all or an explanation as to how getting bigger is going to get better for our town. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. So the review is about how we generally are delivering policing services. And the last time we had this was around about 10 years ago during the austerity. That was driven by the catalyst of austerity, and we had to save around about £120 million. And that's what we've done over the last 10 years or so. So big numbers, really. A lot of that is people. Some of it is structures, as you know, and you'll understand. We've still got £21 million to save over the next 3 years or so. So again, big numbers, really. And what we try and do is reduce the number of people that we have to remove from the organisation, because I'm sure it's the same with the council. Lots of those structural things that we could have or could do have been done before. So part of it started off as a general review of what kind of policing structure do we need, given the new way that policing and some of the challenges that policing is facing, because we have different threats to where we were 10 years ago. So, you know, there's an awful lot more cybercrime. Fraud is on the increase. So we have to position ourselves as an organisation in the best way that we can. One of the things is being looked at is the going to bigger command areas where at a local level, the numbers aren't affected, but you are starting to take out command functions and structures. Now, there is a risk around that, Council. Of course, there's a risk around that. One of the successes, I think, of the LPA model is that there's a regular contact, familiarity. You've talked about the relationship with the superintendent here and Steve and predecessors. And I think we have to be very cautious around that and how we maintain that. Likewise with local neighbourhood policing as well. How does the force maintain its local relationships and understand what's going on with local communities? As you say, Reading is very different from West Berkshire and from Bracknell and Wokingham, and we do recognise that. So at the moment we're in the place where we need to review to see how we're delivering general policing services. I don't think that's a bad thing to do as a force. On top of that, we do have to look at saving £21 million, and I can't get around that. In order to balance my budget, I've got to look at what I can do, what it will be Jason taking it forward can do. What I would say is that all the good things that you talked about are, from a local authority point of view, are exactly the same things that are a good thing for us. You know, all the things that you are frustrated by, to some extent we're frustrated, or I'm certainly frustrated by. So you take neighbourhood policing and the lack of visibility. I feel that exactly the same, because, you know, if there's one thing I think we can be assured of, we have a shared mission and vision of what we want to police the communities of, for me, the Thames Valley and Reading, for you, Reading. And certainly the ethos around the policing over many years has been localised neighbourhood policing on an LPA structure. So whatever the structure looks like, and we are consulting, Councillor, we are interested in people's views. We've made no decisions at all. We have to give you something to start with, if that makes sense. And then we will see what model is the one that, to some extent, practically and economically we can afford, but at the same time making sure that we're keeping hold of some of those golden aspects of a localised police service. Because if I was living locally in Reading, that's what I would want, and I know that's what we want to deliver as a force. It's how we look and achieve that.
Mr. Barber.
Thank you. I think the points raised by concern are entirely fair. I think the partnership links are really important, and this is an operational decision, but it's one where I'll be working with Jason, who'll be taking this forward very closely on how I then hold the force to account for delivering it. So on terms of the partnership working, I think that's really important that we have a clear plan for each area about who is going to be responsible, so that we maintain that direct contact. I don't think any changes to 5 or any other number necessarily mean that is lost. Take the Berkshire West structure at the moment. There are increasingly cooperation amongst the 3 councils. The Combating Drugs Partnership is a good example of bringing those 3 councils together with a strategic vision. That doesn't mean we can't do things locally and differently between West Berkshire and Reading, for example. But I think for me, one of the key things is to make sure the building blocks remain. So in performance management, as an absolute minimum, I would want the force to still be reporting performance based on the current, I would say current local police area boundaries. At the moment, they're almost all coterminous. In this part of the world, we are coterminous perfectly with the local authorities. The reality is the reporting ought to be coterminous with community safety partnerships from local authorities. There's a bit of nuance in other parts of the Thames Valley, but basically saying that those statistics that you see reported should still be reported on a Reading basis, because that allows me, that allows you to help hold the force to account for delivering the results for Reading and not being lost in some bigger area. And I think there is a good argument, although it's an operational decision, for ensuring that in the command structure as it goes down, that certainly I've already had the assurance that neighbourhood teams remain exactly as they are, and so they would remain coterminous with Reading, and they would remain the same size. So you're not seeing some scaling up, and the minimum resourcing numbers that are available for response teams, I think there is a good argument for saying that should be maintained on the same basis of local authority areas, so that you don't end up with the general drift into one particular area that's sucking resource in from other places. You maintain the building blocks within it, but you have the ability of a commander to oversee the whole area. And at the moment, we do have an instance where officers from the neighbouring local policing areas will come in and support Reading, and vice versa, and we will have those forced roamers. So we will always have that movement, and I think that is a good thing. That's a strength to Reading, because Reading will receive that support as much as anything. But what we can't afford to do is move to a position where all of those just become one big amalgamous lump that just get moved en masse from one area to the other. Because I think all of the concerns that you don't and you reasonably have would be shared by others. If I was talking to councillors in West Berkshire, they would be exactly as concerned that all the resources are going to go into Reading, because that's the big town where the demand is. But I think we can still manage to get a structure that saves some significant sums of public money, whilst maintaining those building blocks, because I think that's the starting point. We're not looking to make any changes, and I'm determined that certainly around the community policing element, that remains as is, because much as we'll talk about a lot more about neighbourhood policing, I'm sure, I don't recall ever having any correspondence with any member of the public about where the superintendent sits or what rank the commander was, whether it's a chief superintendent or a superintendent for a local area, because what the public want is for that effective work on the ground.
Can I just a final point for me, just on that, the five structure of the East and West and Buckinghamshire, ironically, that's what we had in 2010. So that was the basic BCU structure, basic command unit structure for this force. And what we did in 11 and 12 was change it to the local police areas that we have now. Now you and others will judge if you've been around. I know Councillor Page has been through all of that. I don't know how long you've been serving, but what your perceptions of that structure was, and what it felt like in Reading compared to what we've got now. So, but that was the structure that we had before.
A very quick response, Councillor Rowlands, are you all right? And when I say quick, I mean really quick.
In deference to others, no. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank you for your responses.
Councillor White?
Thank you, Chair. My experience, as others have said already this evening, is that you see police driving around in cars occasionally, but you're not seeing policemen and women on the pavement to talk to and sort of tackling issues in the area. And that I email the police team's email address, it just disappears into a black hole. I'm assuming someone's reading them. Occasionally I get a response, but it's pretty poor. And talking to residents, they're getting a similar non-response and a similar not seeing the police officers. I was out door knocking at the weekend, and one issue that was raised by a number of people on a stretch of a road in Reading was drug dealing, and they've reported it a number of times, but they've not seen any action at all. The drug dealing in this area just continues, and probably out of the 10 people I spoke to, 5 people will raise this exact same issue. What would you say to these residents? You're clearly stretched at the moment in a number of directions, as we've heard, but what would you say to residents, and what sort of response should they expect at the moment? Is it just a case of nothing's going to happen on this sort of issue in the near term, or would you expect something to be actually happening and maybe disrupting the drug dealing?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. I mean, please feel free to share the particular road with Steve from that point of view. I mean, Steve touched on some of the work that we have done around drugs in particular. I think there's definitely one aspect that is a constant battle for us, and that is that cycle of feedback to what we're doing when we get told. Your frustration is understandable. It's not good enough, really, that if you're in contact with the police, and we're giving you the numbers and the addresses for you to contact us and encourage you to do it, if you don't get a response back, well, I understand your frustration. I apologise for it, because that's not how we should be. There is an issue about people and numbers able to do that, but that shouldn't be the default setting as well. We will encourage people. What we sometimes will have is that we will definitely have situations where we are doing something in the covert space around some of the drug dealing that's going on, which won't necessarily be obvious, and quite rightly can't be obvious to the public. We wouldn't share that, because that, if you like, affects the tactics. But obviously that won't be the case in all aspects of on-street drug dealing, and certainly neighbourhood policing has a part to play in that, but also the patrol response. Incident and crime response officers, ICR officers with the response teams, do have a role in hot spotting and following the community intelligence that comes in. So your information will go into the intelligence base and will be used to direct Steve and his resources around patrol strategies, for example. But that cycle of letting you know that it matters to us, we're doing something about it, I accept. If that's not happening, that's not good enough. But Steve, do you want to talk about the drug dealing?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the point is, again, is really valid. For me, this is about us understanding the importance of, you said, we did, and I completely accept the point around, sometimes you'll send some information and not hear anything back. As already covered, that it's not a great feeling. In terms of the drug space itself, we're trying to move to a point where we're identifying those drug lines which are causing the most harm. That's probably not, and I accept this, great reassurance for people who are seeing drug dealing going on the street outside their houses. But the wider point really is, we've got the combating drugs strategy. I think this isn't necessarily just a policing issue. I think this is a partnership issue. I think we've got to get together and understand that our bit of it is around the enforcement. So managing the intelligence, understand where it's going on and doing the enforcement bit. But actually it's broader than that. We've got to look at collectively pooling our resources and trying to solve some of the other problems, like the environmental problems and the help we give people. So, a way of saying yes, accepted, but actually I think there's still some work to do in this space.
Can I just mention another point as well? And I want to put a pause between your observations, which are valid, and I accept, and I'm sorry to hear that. And then just a thought, in any town or any city across the Thames Valley, we will have those people that are habitual drug users and addictions, and that will drive sometimes acquisitive crime as they look to generate money for their habit, and they. We want, them engaging, we all do our enforcement, but certainly health providers help in other ways as well. But there is a significant group of people that will be using drugs on a casual basis. And, absolutely recreational. And it's interesting the terms that we use about it, because if there wasn't any drugs, there wouldn't be a market for dealers. And everybody that takes drugs on a recreational basis, or everybody that you may or may not know that takes drugs on a recreational basis, are part of the county drugs line, because they are funding those that wish to sell drugs in our towns and cities. But I think people put a bit of distance between themselves and that. But at the same time, every time you hear about a young child being exploited for drugs lines or injured or harmed or whatever, we need to make that connection better between what people see as casual or recreational is actually a very permissive activity that's causing a great deal of harm. Thanks.
Can I just come in quick? I'll try and keep it quick, but I think it's on the comms point, actually, Chairman, you mentioned earlier about how getting a bit slicker, I think, more polished, I think was your turn in the communications. And I think some of it links back to that. It's not an excuse for the lack of action which the Chief Constables addressed, but I think it's actually about the feedback loop on all sorts of things, whatever the scale is. It might be to the individual who's reported something, even if there is no obvious overt action being taken about that particular incident, at least getting some feedback about the sorts of things that are going on in the area provides some reassurance there is activity. Or it might be some of the wider stuff. I had some correspondence from someone who in Reading last week, he was raising issues about a series of shoplifting. And actually, when I checked with Steve last night, actually someone's serving time for it. They were arrested, they were charged, they've been sentenced. That's all good. But the concern is still out there that nobody's done anything about it. And so I can now happily go back to someone and say, well, wasn't that a good result? You didn't know about this. But I think there's definitely a point about that. And I think one of the challenges is at the moment that is probably a bit too decentralised, and it can rely on a good PCSO in a neighbourhood policing team to communicate it, to use a local Facebook, whatever. I think there's more that can be done centrally to make sure that we're getting the media out there at the right level. So we're not just talking to the regional news, but we're actually dealing with the social media, the local community newsletters to get those messages out there. Really important.
Well, it is an important principle of justice that justice is seen to be done, and if it's not, then you're going to struggle with perceptional issues throughout. Okay, Councillor White?
No, happy for others to have a say.
Wonderful. Councillor Ennis?
Thank you. I just want to put on record the thanks, because as I said, I work in a professional capacity in the criminal justice system. The thanks to the police, the work the police do as colleagues in the work that I do, and also personally that I had to call on the police on 2 occasions in the last year, one professionally and one as a councillor. And the response I got from the police was very, very pleasing, very supportive, very helpful, came back, can't complain. I mean, obviously we're talking about personal individuals, but on both occasions, one more serious than the other, I received some really good treatment and support from the police, and I think that needs to be put on record as myself, if that's okay. The question I've got is about, it's linked with disproportionality and engagement of young people, particularly, you know, young black men. There's a high disproportionality, particularly in Reading, of young black men being stopped and searched, but also first-time entrants is a big issue in Reading. The numbers are not high, but it's higher than elsewhere, of first-time entrants. And what level, because we've got to get the right people, that's the issue, isn't it? And we could end up not getting the right people that we need to get. And the question about engagement, because there's been issues like outcome 22, use of, you know, keeping people out of the criminal justice system, first-time entrants. I'd like to know what your views on engagement and things like outcome 22, because I'm not sure we use it. I think it might be used elsewhere. It's supposed to be very good to keep, you know, to get younger people to understand the issue of respect, but also keep them out of the criminal justice system. I don't know what your view is on that.
Thanks, Councillor. Well, anything that we can do to, if you have that holy grail of protecting the community, but also keeping people out of the criminal justice system, that's the best place to be, isn't it? So everyone's safe, there's less crime, but we're not necessarily automatically putting people into the criminal justice system, because we know it can have adverse and long-term consequences. That's just what the data and the you know, logic would tell us, really. We do some diversionary tactics. So, for example, we have the drug awareness scheme. So if someone's stopped in the street and they've got possession of certain types of crime, then we put them to certain types of drugs. We put them towards an education program, a bit like driver awareness. That's ongoing across the 3 counties. That was something that TVP did, and ahead across the country. So we are keen on diversion schemes where appropriate. You have to make those judgment calls sometimes, because there are people that definitely do need to be within the criminal justice system. On the stop and search aspect of things, well, you heard what HMIC said about how we do stop and search. We recognise the impact of stop and search, and we have quite a developed governance process over stop and search. It is part of our race action plan, because we know it disproportionately, nationally and locally, can affect people from the African Caribbean community and African Caribbean heritage in particular, in a way that doesn't affect some other ethnic groups. So we have a strategic independent advisory group made up of members of the public who review how and what we do around stop and search. We provide them with data around the different areas of disproportionality. We also require all our officers to use body-worn video in those interactions, and that strategic IG can view those videos at any time, randomly view those. So there's a kind of check and balance at a strategic level. Good training is really important. We want officers to use stop and search. It's important. We recognise it as a power, but we need it can be and is effective in detecting crime in particular, and protecting people, particularly around violence and the like as well. The simple thing is that from a force point of view, we should be able to explain disproportionality or change it. That's the simple. If we can't explain why something's disproportionate, then that's an unfortunate place to be. So sometimes, for example, if we have a particular offending profile of an offender, and that's different an ethnic group to a local population, that can increase the disproportionality of that racial group per the resident population. Does that make sense? So, and that can mean that it can look disproportionate against, in effect, other factors. But we need to be able to explain that and be able to convince people and sell it and share it in a way that people understand and trust. You know, and so that's a constant challenge for us. But we have governance over it at the moment, and an independent groups of the members of the public that will challenge us and reassure themselves, and then report into myself and the commissioner about what their views is on the way that we're using stop and search.
If I can just touch on the outcome 22, I think we may see maybe if not outcome 22, but there's change in legislation coming out of court disposals, which will kick in quite soon. And we've been having some meetings around that, how my office oversees what the force does, which will allow the force to put a bit more conditionality than might be the case with an outcome 22. But broadly speaking, the police can define almost any activity as a legitimate out of court disposal. There are some limitations in law, but it means that you don't any longer have the prescribed this action or that action. So some of the flexibility that came under outcome 22 can now be achieved through out of court disposals with a bit more of a stick as well as the carrot. So at the moment there's a process going through at the force of designing what those outcomes may well be, and it will be a case of engaging with local diversionary partners to look at exactly that. But I definitely think there's a real opportunity to deliver justice when those are appropriate and to reduce reoffending.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, my thanks to the three of you for coming along and giving your presentation. One observation that I had from that was surrounding the statistics. You mentioned arrests and how many arrests were made. I think what would be useful as well is how many of those arrests turned into successful prosecutions. And also mentioning about we're 10% better than we were last year without the last year's figures there, I think would certainly be useful for future presentations. My main question, though, is, I suppose, something that's near to everybody's hearts right now. Obviously, revelations from the Metropolitan Police in terms of the behaviours of certain officers, serving officers, namely David Carrick, and obviously the horrific crimes of Wayne Couzens, and now I think a new one in terms of a potential paedophile ring within the Metropolitan Police itself, which came to light because of, I think, a chief inspector recently sadly ending his life as information over this started to come out. My question is, and I know that there is an exercise taking place. I know that I think in the Metropolitan Police it was 1,071 officers currently under investigation, but there is also an exercise amongst all police officers to do a check against a key database. Can I ask, I mean, obviously this is a major wake-up call for a lot of chief constables throughout the UK. Is there something within Thames Valley that you are doing in terms of extra measures, looking at the vetting procedure, reviewing that sort of thing? So it's important that obviously trust and confidence is returned, you know, to the police, and this is something that I think is key moving forwards.
Thanks, Councillor, and I agree with everything that you said. I mean, let me talk about how we go about ensuring, as much as I can reasonably do so, that I'm not going to have an officer that is behaving illegally, abhorrently, morally, poorly, judgment in terms of what they do and how they engage, either from a police discipline point of view or a criminal point of view. So the first thing we do is try and recruit well in terms of the people that are joining policing. And I've talked a little bit about the profile and diverse nature that we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years improving, I think, in terms of the profile of men and women in policing. That's one aspect of things. Secondly, you've got the practical processes, which you've talked on, which is vetting. So police officers and police staff are vetted to a certain level. That level won't change. I think we would all accept, as important as it is, it's a moment in time when you vet somebody, because you vet someone in an application, and then if they move jobs, for example, or they move into a different environment, they might get a higher level of vetting, etc. And then we review vetting of officers on a regular basis. Really important is the culture of the organisation and people feeling they can come forward. And we've had a number of occasions where officers and staff have called out the behaviour of a colleague. And that's encouraging to me. It means that everyone knows what the standards are and others are showing out when people are falling short of that. We have a confidential hotline for officers and staff to call if they want to anonymise their information. We have a probably larger than we would want, given the circumstances, professional standards department, which is made up of investigators, and also a counter-corruption unit as well, that looks at more of our covert tactics to make sure that we are ensuring the integrity of the force as well. And we have a certain amount of monitoring software as well that we use as an organisation in terms of being able to identify certain patterns of behaviour as well. Now, I think any organisation of around about 8,000 people will always have those that don't abide by those rules. And I have sacked people in the past year whose standards have fallen below what you and I would expect as a police officer. There's definitely no doubt that whatever can happen locally in Thames Valley Police, some of that concern and some of those concerns and fears will be fueled by what may go on in other force areas. But I'm not complacent that we will never have circumstances like that. I can tell you what we are doing at the moment. In policing, I don't know if you're aware of this, but every time a police officer is subject to misconduct, then we are under duty to publish that misconduct. I think we're one of the few organisations that we have a duty to actually put it into the public domain. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't, because I think we should. We're a police service. You'd expect us to have high standards. But it does mean that on occasion it can feel like a consistent reporting of behaviours of police officers. I guess in other professions as well, there may be similar amounts of people that are disciplined removed, but I make no case for them. I'm just saying it a little bit of context. So I think that's what I would say in terms of what we do. I've never seen so much appetite and endeavour around making sure that we can reassure you as members of the community that the types of police officers that we have in all our forces are as good as you would expect. And I can only say my commitment to that of Jason's is going forward is entirely that.
Right, that takes us to time, and I haven't seen anybody else indicate in any case. So I shall thank once again those who've come along and say happy retirement to you, Chief Constable. I hope you enjoy yourself, whatever it is you do after policing. Probably something lower pressure, less stress, I imagine. Thanks, Steve, again, and thank Mr. Barber for coming along. Great, wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone. Can I just thank you for the support? I know quite rightly you'll challenge us on the things you want us to do better, and I agree and wish we could and will endeavour to, but just want to thank you for the support you give my officers on a daily basis. They are young, many of them are young, and they are our brothers and sisters and sons and daughters, and they need our collective support because it's a tough ask. But thank you for what you do. Thanks.
Super. Right. When you hear people say the name Jason a lot in a presentation as well, you realise what a ridiculous name it is. Ancient Greek, but sounds like it was invented in 1979, Anyway, we move on to item 7, the tackling inequality strategy. And I dare say we have Mark Redfern on the magic box to present. Charlie's going to introduce it from the public microphone, Charlie. Outrageous. I'm afraid we do. I'm a creature of habit like that.
Councillors, I present to you the Tackling Inequality Strategy. All strategies are important. However, I would say to you that this strategy is potentially more important than most and should, if implemented correctly, make a profound effect upon the borough and the residents of the borough. Why do I say that? Well, I don't need to remind you, I'm sure, but I will, that the vision that you laid out in the corporate plan to help Reading realise its potential also has noted, and to ensure that everyone who lives and works here can share the benefits of its success. And what is that success? Well, over the last 2 decades, Reading has grown into one of the most vibrant and economically significant urban centres in the country. Consistently recognised as an area with good quality of life for economic achievement and growth. Great success, you say, but there is a but to that. The most recent national analysis of deprivation highlighted that some areas within Reading are within the bottom 10 and 20% of areas in the country for overall deprivation. That's quite a difference between the success I outlined. Life expectancy in Reading in the most deprived areas is 10 years lower than its most affluent areas. Not everyone shares in that success or can bring themselves up to that level of success. Of course, there are many other corporate strategies and plans that work in this area. That's why we have the corporate plan, and many of them are listed out in Appendix 1. However, the scope of this strategy goes beyond those, and it's to take us into a new area, a new long-term plan. Page 24 outlines the commitments of this strategy, and just to draw your attention to a few things. First one, the prioritisation of issues and areas where it's most needed by residents. I noted the differential in deprivation in certain areas of the borough. And secondly, in driving attainment in skills in education and training to help people be able to raise themselves up to take an opportunity of that success, which I mentioned. Just to note to you that some areas of the borough are the 5% lowest for attainment in education and skills and training across the country. Now, specifically within this strategy, there are certain key criteria. One of them is working closely with partners. This is not something you do or we can do by ourselves. And certainly an engagement of residents, understanding their particular needs and requirements and how we meet those. And also, of course, with ward members in the areas that we'll be looking at. We are looking to do area-based pilots to kick this off, and those are outlined in Appendix 3. And of course, those will be driven by officers reporting directly to the Chief Exec, who takes a personal interest, of course, in this area, and of course, reporting into members as well. So I recommend this strategy to you as one of those potentially most critical that the council brings to bear.
Thank you, Executive Director. I've often said here that this is a sort of personal priority for me. I know it's a priority for colleagues as well. Why? Because economic success, especially that staggering economic success like we have in Reading, generates economic inequality. It's no coincidence, is it, that the three places with the highest levels of economic inequality, London, Cambridge and Reading, are places with strikingly successful economies. But we have to do what we can to ensure that all of our residents can share in that success. But that economic inequality is a notoriously tricky problem to solve, and chucking money at an issue might turn it into a cyclical issue, but it does not truly solve it. So we have to have a sustainable programme of action. We've had that great success in the past week with the Levelling Up Fund award here in Reading, which shows at least that the government have acknowledged that intra-locality levelling up is important. But the main thrust of government policy has nonetheless remained inter-regional levelling up. So we, I think, as a council, will go to first principles, looking at skills and education and access to work as we seek to bridge that economic inequality gap. It will be a focused endeavour, place-based in nature, working with partners and over time bringing more and more partners in. Of course, the VCS are going to be integral, but over time, I really want the NHS to come with us on this journey with all of the resources and the potential that they have also. We'll be conscious of individual differences and environmental factors. How people feel about their areas does matter for how they feel in terms of a sense of belonging to their town. There's an awful lot here, I suppose I could say, that should really be done by central government. Hence, you'll see some reference to Berkshire devolution, a sort of approach that the 6 authorities here have, particularly around skills and the devolution of the adult education budget, as something that could really deliver for residents, not just in Reading, but across Berkshire. Enough from me. I shall hand over to Councillor Terry.
He hasn't stolen my speech. It's fine. It does have my name on this report, but as the leader's just done his introduction, I think it should be noted that it is something that he's been leading along with the Chief Executive for a little while now. The Council's focus in seeking to help everyone in Reading realise their potential predates the current cost of living crisis, but this strategy now pulls together various work streams across the town into one document with clear outcomes and actions. This is a needs-led strategy looking at the analysis of various data, but specifically, as already mentioned, the index of multiple deprivation and recent census data. This important analysis guides policymakers in what is happening and where, so that underlying negative factors can be identified and appropriate action can be taken. However, the term deprivation can be felt to be derogatory. This is somehow critical or disrespectful of local areas and the people who live there. That is not what is intended. What is true is that for some residents, they do not have access to enough money, food and good living conditions, and this has been exacerbated by the rise in fuel costs and the cost of living crisis. There is a clear focus on education, training and skills to support people to realise their potential to improve their everyday lives. But it's about more than this. We will always be mindful of people's diverse personal life experiences and the barriers they can face, which affect their ability to overcome inequality and adversity. A place-based approach means looking also at environmental factors, as has been said. Where you live and how it feels and how safe you feel are important, and access to green spaces and hopefully local jobs so that you don't have to travel will contribute to things like carbon emission reduction. I often talk about the difference between standard of living people might have and the quality of life that they might choose. This strategy, this approach is one where the council and partners will listen to what local people have to say about what will improve life for them, which may differ from what we think. Working towards a more consistent quality of life will take time, and this strategy is just another moment in time when it is right for the council to focus assistance in areas and communities that all the evidence says needs our focused support right now. But let's be clear, there's no one-size-fits-all solution for tackling inequality. It's about identifying responses to current needs. And this can only be achieved, as I said, by listening to local people and being guided what they themselves tell us is needed. Alongside this, it's important to say, though, that we'll continually look to ensure that all children get the best start in life and the very best education to enable them to have good, productive and fulfilling lives. And it is an important moment that we're taking this strategy forward. And some might say that, you know, it has outcomes and actions, but where's the targets, where's the this and the that? These are things that we have to discover anew. These are things we have to find out by working in local communities, what will really make a difference. And I very much look forward to this work getting, well, it's already underway. And as it says, there's lots of things we're already doing, but this is very specifically looking at what are the right solutions in today, you know, today, not 40 years ago and not 40 years to come. What do we need to do now? And I hope that we will make that difference that we're promising to make to people.
Thank you, Councillor Terry. Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. Inequality in Reading is a massive injustice, as it is across the country. People in the richest part of Reading live for 10 years longer than people in the poorest part. Sorry, Councillor Hoskin, did you want to join in? Thank you. And it's getting worse compared to other parts of the country. We have 2 areas now in the most 10% deprived in the country. This is more than doubled. That's gone from 2 areas to 5 areas. Things are getting worse in Reading. As Green councillors, we are getting more casework with people struggling. In particular, recently I've had a rise in people contact me facing eviction and homelessness, as I'm sure other councillors have. We support tackling equality and we support the strategy. We do have some concerns though, as Councillor Terry just alluded to. I was asking about outcomes, I was asking about targets, I was asking about how this was going to be monitored in detail to see if we were really making progress, if we were really making a dent. And I accept that that's not easy and that's going to be worked out as we go to some extent. Also, the strategy runs from the pilot, and the strategy runs from 2023 until 2026. But there are many large areas of Reading experiencing deprivation outside of the 2 pilot areas that also need help now. Green councillors will be supporting the strategy and continuing to work to reduce Reading's widening inequality.
Thank you, Councillor White. Worth saying, I mean, look, the pilot doesn't exist in a hermetically sealed bubble. You know, the lessons can be learned as it moves on and applied to the other holistic work that we do, especially with the VCS through the Tackling Poverty Partnership, but other work that we do around the town as well. Councillor McEwen.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome this report and the strategy. I'd really like to highlight some of the work that New Directions College are about to undertake or currently undertaking, and just a few examples, and there are quite a few in the report. Providing core skills for local people, delivering multiply training, you'll be aware, is a national numeric skills development project, to increase the delivery of apprenticeships and vocational education, which will help to reduce the skills gap for key sectors within our town, to offer family learning activities which will promote development of skills and parental engagement in education. There's just some of the things that at New Directions College will be undertaking or already undertaking, which I really sure colleagues will agree will help to benefit the people of Reading. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor McKeon. We're very lucky to have New Directions, which a lot of councils got rid of services that are even comparable to that many years ago. Councillor Lang.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mark, for your presentation. And I think Liz, Councillor Terry and Councillor Brock summed it up rather well, and Councillor White makes some good points. I welcome the place-based focus. Let's face it, it's set a very high bar for itself. Let's hope it succeeds. You know, inequality is about perception, as with the people that live there, their perception of where they live and the perception of others to that place that don't live there. There isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. This will benefit areas, not just in Whitley and Church, but in particular Catesgrove, Catesgrove wards and Redlands and the wider town in general. I'm personally pleased to see the wording on the focus on physicality, improving the area, improving the assets, improving play areas and such. Because I think there was at the last policy committee we had on the HMO supplementary planning document, there was a excerpt in there about the broken window effect and how it can affect areas when the physical doesn't look good. So I'd like to see them. I'm glad that's mentioned in this. On the whole, good, but I still can't quite get used to, and we get accused of speaking in using too many anecdotes when we're describing policies. But as for someone that does live in a place that is sometimes described as being in the bottom 10%, 20%, or even 5%, it's a person. I haven't got that perception of where I live, and I don't think my neighbours have as well. But obviously, that's what the data points to. So it's horses for courses. It's what everybody thinks about the place they live in. It Whitley and Church and Redlands and Catesgrove, fantastic places to live. It's got its issues, but I love living there anyway. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lane. We're right to be ambitious. I think much better to be ambitious and fail in some of what we seek than to be reserved and promise only what we can guarantee we can deliver. We wouldn't do our residents a service doing it. And on the point about sort of environmental perceptions and how that affects one's sense of place, I've always been struck by comments made by a former senior Labour politician who said that if you had more money in your pocket, but your local park was still full of needles, you would not feel any wealthier. And I think it's a very important thing that we would do well to remember. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to add my appreciation of New Directions College and also apologise because I should have declared an interest. It didn't occur to me. I don't think I'd have to recuse myself, but just my other half. If anyone knows him, they will also know his English isn't very good, and he attends excellent English lessons at New Directions. And I know they've been dealing with almost overwhelming numbers of Ukrainian refugees as well. And so, I think that work is appreciated and effective. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Although that is an interesting story, I can assure you it is not an interest. But yeah, that's thank you. Listen, detecting no dissent, then I assume that we're all agreeing this unanimously. Yes. Good. Wonderful. Wonderful. Brilliant. And thank you very much, Executive Director. Moving us on then to item 8, which has an implausibly long title: Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire, and Berkshire West Integrated Care Partnership. Mr. White. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to briefly introduce the paper about the Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire, Berkshire West Integrated Care Partnership. It's important just to recognise that Reading Borough Council is part of the integrated care system with its integrated care board. We fall within the footprint, and I heard it explained very eloquently by the chair recently in another meeting that if you think about the integrated care system as all about the NHS, you're missing the point. So we're a part of it. The integrated care board managed the purchasing arrangements for healthcare in our area. And as outlined in section 9.1 of the report, the legislation requires that the board forms a partnership arrangement. So it's a legal requirement, it's a statutory committee, and that is making decisions at a place-based level, and it's called the Integrated Care Partnership. Sections 1.2 and 1.3 outline the proposed membership, and we're very fortunate to have 2 of our members as representatives of the council, Councillor Brock and Councillor Terry, and Councillor Brock happily is in the chair for the first year. So the local authority has got its hand on the tiller, as it were. And given this requirement, I draw your attention to the paper and the council's role, the integrated care partnership, its terms of reference, and the appointment of the 2 councillors. Thank you.
Thank you. I should reassure Councillor Terry that she is definitely just the nominated. Yeah, that's it. No, look, I'll pass over to Councillor McKeown.
Thank you, Chair. As highlighted in the report and obviously raised by Martin, Reading will form part of the Bob ICP. I'm getting used to all the acronyms. That's Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire, Berkshire West Integrated Care Partnership. I won't go through all the aims because obviously that's in the report. I think the place is imperative within the Bob partnership. And obviously it's been discussed in various committees that it's really important that the voice of Reading residents, of our residents, is heard within the larger structure of the Bob ICP. So I think it's obviously important that that's remembered throughout. So thank you very much for the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McKeown. I think worth acknowledging that the geography of the Bob ICS is particularly bizarre. No surprise that it was the last of the ICSs to be announced and commissioned. The sheer scale of Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire and Berkshire West and the difference between the areas covered there does make it especially challenging. So important for us that we need to emphasise that place-based decision-making, place-based leadership. So it's good then. I would think that I've managed to somehow accidentally end up as chair of the ICP for this year, and I'm sure I'll have a lot of fun in so doing. So not noticing anybody else indicating, I think I'll suggest, are we agreeing this unanimously? No dissent here? Yes? Good, wonderful, wonderful. And hopefully Councillor Mitchell will magically reappear. I don't know where he's gone to. Yeah, if you would. He doesn't want to miss the next item. Thank you, Martin, as well. Moving us on to, and we can slowly set ourselves up for this whilst Councillor Mitchell reappears, the reserved matters for brighter futures for children. I guess we've got, okay, online on the magic box. Hold on 1 second, Kit, and see. Has he disappeared? Did you know he's obviously gone? Yeah, he's engaging in a public health negative act, I think. Yeah, stunting his growth. Yeah. No, so it's not part two. It's it's acting in our capacity as sole member. Well, don't worry, monitoring officer. We'll crack on. Over to Kit.
Thank you. Good evening. My name's Kit Lamb. I'm the Director of Financial Resources for Brighter Futures. My apologies for not being able to attend in person this evening. To give you an overview of the paper that you have before you, last July, the company set up a task and finish group to primarily address the staffing issues we face in one of our teams, the Together for Family service. The issues are high turnover of qualified social workers, low retention rates, and very high reliance on the use of agency staff. As of this week, we currently have 24 out of our 48 team of qualified social workers being via agency. This results in a significant level of overspend from using agency staff. To give you an idea, the current cost is currently 30k per annum per worker more if we use agency rather than having it as a permanent hire on our own contract books. It creates a level of instability within the team, which makes it really difficult to embed and sustain service change and improvement for our children and young people. Therefore, through the work of the Task and Finish group over the summer, we have made a good improvement in terms of stabilising that team, that high turnover rate and the low retention rate through upskilling our managers, training, supporting the dealing of backlog work and so on. However, we still face the ongoing issue of not being able to convert those high number of agency staff into permanent hires. Roughly a year ago, we started grown our own programmes, and that is recruitment of ASYEs and overseas workers. For those who are not familiar with ASYEs, they are transitional 1 year of workers before they become qualified social workers. However, that takes time. It also impacts the balance of experienced versus inexperienced. So in tackling this issue of agency staff that we would like to convert into permanent hires, we have recognised that there's a level of expertise and resilience needed to work in this particular team. That's because those particular social workers are required to navigate between child protection work and court work, which is less attractive than in our other social worker teams. So we hope that the recruitment payment scheme is the vehicle that would aid us with that conversion at a much more rapid pace. The details of the scheme are set out in the proposal. In conclusion, your support is now needed to allow us to tackle this ongoing issue of high numbers of agency staff that has both service and financial implications that are detrimental until we either reduce that problem or resolve it completely.
Thank you, Councillor Hoskin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I'm not going to repeat what's been said. I think that was a very effective overview of the scheme. I think this is absolutely worth doing, and I've been convinced by officers in terms of, this has a this is the right thing to do with a reasonable chance of making an impression on what is and has been for some time a considerable issue for us in terms of the agency staff. And this focuses on one particular team, but a very important team within the department, and it's been laid out why this is important. So it's also really important to emphasise this is not the only thing in terms of trying to address the both the agency and recruitment issues in Bright Futures. Actually, in terms of the overall levels of staffing, well, certainly when I was briefed 2 weeks ago, things move quickly. We've actually got a good level of staffing, but we do have a high level of agency. So this is why this particular scheme is being brought forward. So, yeah, I mean, this is not going to be something we just simply do and take away. It's going to be something we're focusing on over the months and years to come, I'm sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hoskin. I haven't seen any other indications, so I'm going to assume we're okay with the recommended action. We're agreeing it unanimously, yes? Wonderful, brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you, Kit Online. That takes us to the end of our agenda, yes? So thank you, everybody. Have a lovely evening.